Hello, welcome back to IASA's Virtual Leadership Series. We're on the third of 3 episodes on performance, managing and measuring workloads. Once again, I'm Darin Reffit, the Director of Product Marketing Excellence with Guidewire and Chair of IASA's e-learning committee. I'm here with Cathy Ellwood, the founder of Ellwood Enterprises, and Kerry Crockett, the CEO of IASA. So last week, we looked at how leadership competencies are different in a virtual world. And this week, we want to look at actual performance measurement. So what we want to measure, how we want to measure. But before we do that, for people who may or may not have watched the last episode, Kerry, in past sessions, we've talked a lot about having clear expectations, goals, objectives. Why not just evaluate people based on their results using the exact same criteria we used when we set up the objectives?
Well, to some extent you will, but with virtual teams, you really need to be more specific in terms of what you're measuring and how you're evaluating performance, because there's less opportunity for that face-to-face clarification. You know, if you think about it, in an office setting, we often think about those folks who come in early or they stay late, that they're the most dedicated and hardworking folks that we have on the team. And the preference and leniency sometimes is given to them either consciously or unconsciously during that performance evaluation. But in a virtual setting, supervisors have to focus on that what and the how of work rather than that where and the when. Performance, is a measure of success against a goal, and that goalpost has shifted really. Using all that same criterion to measure performance, I don't think it'd be fair right now. I think we really need to focus instead on the behavior of our team members, what their level of cooperation is, how they manage conflict, what their mental stability is, those kinds of things. And also, have they grown and have they learned from this experience and really adapted in how they're working?
Those are really good points, Kerry. I think it's really important that in this virtual world, though, you've got to be more specific and you've got to be objective. And it's really important to be transparent because you don't get that face-to-face interaction as much. And that creates opportunities for being misunderstood. I would say that managers this year are going to have to be a lot more flexible, and they need to look at whether or not the roles and responsibilities have changed, from when they started working at home. What did they have to do different? What did they have to learn? What barriers and obstacles got in their way? And how did that person overcome those? I think what really hit me as I was thinking about this is dealing with ambiguity. There's so many unknown answers and you don't know how to do it, and how you react and how you continue to deal with those situations really matters. And so from my perspective, what you have to think about is what sources of information are you going to need? If you think about it, in doing a performance review before, you could pretty much, like you said earlier, you saw when they came in, you saw them working, you were able to observe how they participated in meetings. You don't get to see that person now as much. And it's so important not to let your own preconceived notions and biases get in the way of being objective, particularly when you're evaluating performance. And I think, like I said, you've got to make sure that you have the right information and where you're getting the information from, because a lot of things have really changed. And so evaluating performance is in a lot of ways the same, but in a lot of ways, I think it's really different.
I do want to chime in and say, Kerry, I'm not sure it's fair to evaluate people on mental stability. I feel like for me, that's a pre-existing condition. But any thoughts on this idea about looking at the sources of information and how you're going to evaluate? Where's that going to come from?
Yeah, I think it's going to be challenging for sure. If you work in a company with other managers, I think it's really helpful to ask them about ways they're going to evaluate performance and then try to reach some alignment on the factors that are going to be most important. Because at some point, conversations about rankings across all departments, they're going to occur. And I think, managers really need to be more flexible and really understanding what their staff has gone through. We've talked about this point quite a bit in this series about thinking about your employees and what they're dealing with. And I think, really even thinking about asking your employees for some self-evaluations and really have them give thought to their performance and how it should be managed, as well as asking for suggestions for criteria and seeing what they think would make sense as far as how they would be measured. I think one point I want to emphasize here is that I don't think this is the time to hold folks accountable for their lack of digital literacy, or really having things to do things differently that wasn't a part of their job before. I don't think that would be fair at all.
I agree. But, there is one point I want to, bring up. I think that when we're measuring performance for this year, people, here we are, we're already in September, and people are starting to adapt to the work from home environment. But, there are definitely going to be skills and competencies that are going to be needed to be effective in this world. And so, maybe now's the time also to be thinking about what should we be measuring. To your point though, Kerry, is when people don't think the process is fair, it impacts productivity a lot and engagement, and it creates a high level of toxicity and stress. And that in itself makes the evaluation more stressful. And, we talked a little bit about, Darin, I'm laughing because we were talking about a little bit about mental stability, behavior-based models, but I really think there's something to this. What behaviors do we need to have change in order to make sure the goals and objectives are accomplished as a team? How do we show that we're collaborating in a virtual world? What are some of the things that we need to be doing? I think what you have to see is a little bit more emphasis in the review process on the how and why, so people can actually understand. And I'll give you a couple examples that I've observed as I've been doing this. Your degree of listening, how you listen and participate in a Zoom meeting is really key, or whatever kind of virtual video conferencing technology you use. Is the person engaged? Do they follow up? Do they reach out to the individual and actually communicate, see how they're doing? Do they talk to people? Do they communicate their status on their projects? One of the most difficult things, I think, is to keep commitments and to build trust when you're in a virtual environment. You don't have somebody constantly checking up on you. So what you really have to do is to be proactive, and you take the lead in reporting progress. You be proactive in keeping others informed. So it reshifts and causes you to rethink all of your communication objectives.
Yeah, those are great points, Cathy, absolutely. I think it's also important to rethink the objectives and even consider reprioritizing the ones that really matter and are really material to the environment that we're working in today. I think we also need to think about delivering more actionable feedback and more frequently doing that so that we can really assist our teams so that they can stay on track and help reach their goals, those kinds of things also. It really makes me wonder if we should rethink how we're measuring performance in the years to come and what we're going to learn from all of this.
One of the things I've been thinking about, and this is something that, has been on my mind for a while, but, this year's really made it hit home, is what if we got rid of the traditional rankings? Like most people get a ranking of an achieves. Achieves what? It's all kind of a curve, if you will. Have they really helped to drive performance up? When somebody's told they do not meet, how does that make them feel? And it makes me wonder, if they do not meet and they've been not meeting for a while, why are they still there? How do they help? How do these rankings really help ensure that what really matters gets done? So that's what it makes me think about.
It's definitely a valid point. I do want to jump back to one thing that we kind of started off with, Cathy. You mentioned that, a lot of, we're all kind of adjusting to the virtual world. And that's true to some degree, but there are some people who definitely aren't. There are people that have come back and actually, I've heard about people who are ready to leave their jobs because this whole working from home thing has destroyed the comfort of home and blurred the lines in their work. And there are people who just can't adjust to that. So there's a real example of that. I don't want to get too into the specifics only because of, personnel issues, but that's something we need to remember too, right? Is as we're measuring performance, some people take to this naturally. Some of us have been doing it for years, and others, this is a real struggle even after 6 months of this, right? Mm-hmm. So there's lots to think about here. There's 3 clear takeaways that I heard, and I want to make sure that I'm hearing these right. Number 1, we need to make sure that we're aligning our goals closer to the company's strategic objectives. we need to rethink metrics, roles, and responsibilities. And then number 3, we need to determine what data we're using. And I will throw out one final point on that, which is we're going through right now, there's a tool that a lot of companies are using, Workday. And one thing you can definitely do as opposed to traditional methods is just go out and ask for feedback from people's peers, right? We're in that process. I've gotten probably 3 or 4 in the last 2 weeks where someone's saying, hey, you know what, can you just evaluate this person? And it's a little less quantitative and a little more qualitative, but I think it kind of rounds out and enables you to adjust for those things. So just one additional thought.
Great point.
Any other thoughts on that before we close? Any other ideas about other than Workday or peer evaluations?
Not for me.
Okay, why don't we close with final thoughts then, Kerry? Why don't we start with you this week?
Yeah, I would just say, take another look at the objectives that you set for your team at the beginning of the year and really see if they're, what are the most critical ones? Are they still relevant? And think about how you're measuring success to them. Should that criteria change so that you're able to evaluate that performance more fairly and objectively?
All right, Cathy?
I echo that. I think that it's really key, though, for all of us to really look at the jobs and ask ourselves, are we happy? To your point, Darin, some people aren't going to survive this work from home environment. Too many conflicting priorities, and they don't like it. They don't like working independently, and they don't like having to deal with all the ambiguity. There was once a saying, I'll never forget this, a famous consultant once said, if you can't change the people, change the people. I think that leaders need to really step back and ask themselves, what do we need to be successful in this environment? What metrics are we going to use to guide performance, to determine how agile somebody is, how well they can deal with ambiguity, and get the job done? To me, again, it's communications. It's keeping people informed. It's working effectively as a team. It's identifying and resolving issues without having to rely on so many other people to do it for you. It's being proactive. And all those combined help you achieve what you're trying to get accomplished. For this year, I've thought through this many times, and I just say, like we've said in past sessions, cut people slack.
Mm-hmm.
This has been a year where so many things have happened, and we're all in this together. So, give people some slack, but also take the time now to say, okay, what about next year? And where do we go from here? And plan the work. And that way you're going to be able to get it done the way you want it to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I will see you again next week. I'm really looking forward to next week's session when we're going to jump into effectively networking in a virtual world. Thank you all and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.